Hello and welcome. In this video, I would like to walk you through the track that I just played. All the music was created using either Ableton stock devices or samples from a sample pack from Luftrum. You will find the link to that sample pack in the description. On the first track, I have my kick drum, which I created using Operator. Operator is an FM synthesizer which creates sine waves, and without any editing, it would sound like this. But then there is a pitch envelope, which creates those kind of sounds, and with a very short decay, you get this kick drum feeling. Then everything runs into an overdrive module with a little subtle saturation. Then I filter out some of the very high frequencies here. And then there is a little EQ to accentuate the frequencies that I want to have for the kick drum. The pattern is a very simple 4 on the floor beat. On the second channel, I have another instance of Operator to create a sub bass. It's basically just a sine wave, and the pattern goes like this. I made sure that the sound is monophonic and that there is also some glide so that the bass kind of moves a little bit. Then there is also a compressor with a sidechain from the kick drum to make sure that the very low bass and the very low kick drum never overlap. The first sample from the sample pack that I used in this track was loaded into a sampler module, and the sample sounds like this. And to make the sound a bit more interesting and less static, I added an auto filter module with a notch filter. And as you can see, the notch filter moves all the time to create a subtle movement into the sound. Then I use an EQ8 to get rid of some low frequencies and also accentuate some of the higher frequencies. From here, everything goes into an echo, which is set to a dotted eighth note. And during the performance, I play a lot with the feedback settings and also the filter of the echo. Then there is a little bit of reverb, another compressor to compensate for the level changes that easily happen when you add a lot of filters to sound. And then in the end, there's also another compressor with a sidechain to make sure that there is some room for the kick drum, because the kick drum is not very loud, but you still can hear it very well just because of the sidechain compression. Those three parts together sound like this. And also in the sampler module, I can play with the frequency of the low pass filter to open the sound and close it. I can just play it like a synthesizer and do whatever I want to do in the track. On the next channel, I have another sample, which I transformed into a pad sound. The sample by itself sounds like this. I changed the start point because I just want to have the late part of the sample. Then there is again an auto filter, this time with low pass filter. An echo with a quarter note, a dotted quarter note this time. Then I boost the volume a little bit. There is an EQ, some reverb, and again some sidechain compression. This chord is only triggered once every 4 bars to leave some room for the other sounds that will be part of the track later. I also wanted to create my own hi-hat sounds and percussion sounds, so I took a synthesizer called Meld, and there is a module inside which creates some noise, and usually you would get this not so nice sound, but with the very short envelope, you can get those kind of hi-hat sounds. In the pattern, I also have some ghost notes with lower velocity. And if you have a look here in the modulation matrix, no, in the MIDI matrix, you can see that the velocity is affecting the volume. So this makes those ghost notes quieter. I could also make them even quieter or louder. But this is a more subtle thing, which is good for that kind of music. The sound then goes into a vocoder to add some depth and also a very tiny amount of reverb. Altogether, the next sound is a percussion pattern. And again, I used Melt to create this sound. And the idea of this is to have an FM module with a random modulation. If you go to the MIDI page, you can see that there is a random module here. And I routed this to the macro oscillator 1. And so basically this is what's happening here. It changes those parameters all the time. And we need to make them very short in order to have something which resembles a percussion sound. I created a simple pattern here. And from here, I sent the signal into a vocoder. And then I modulated the formant parameter with an LFO. Then we have quite a big amount of echo, also in ping pong mode, to create a hypnotic feeling. And from here, there is another reverb. On the next channel, I wanted to introduce more dub chords into the track, and for that I used Drum Rack. Here are two samples, which are the same sample, but different parts of the sample. So I used the start point to trigger this part and that part of the same sample. And in this very simple pattern that I created, I added an EQA to filter out the low end. Then there is another auto filter with a high pass filter that automatically moves. Again, my compressor to compensate for the volume changes. If I do this, I usually take a rather long attack and a kind of mid-range release. From here, I go into the most important part of that processing chain, which is the echo. Also on my controller, I can quickly change the feedback to create those typical like endless overdrive tape echo cascades that we all like. Then there is a little bit of reverb, and altogether sounds like this. On the next channel, I have a shaker, which is basically a variation of the hi-hat. Let's listen to the pattern first. I used variations of the velocity in that sound again, and in the MIDI matrix, I routed that velocity to the amp attack. So what's basically happening here, if you take the attack time, the sound changes a lot. And if you find the right settings and play a little bit with the amount of the modulation, you can create a very dynamic and groovy feel for those shaker sounds. And it's nice to add this on top of everything else in the track. So this is without the shaker, and then with the shaker. The last part of this track are higher chords. Most of the sounds that I created so far are more in the lower end and the mid-range, so I need another sound in the higher range. And for this I took another sample of the sample pack and transposed it, so I'm playing a rather high note here, and I just played a lot of short notes here in that pattern. And now it sounds very boring because it's always the exact same sound. And this sound is taking use of the bandpass filter. So the first thing that I did here is I added some automatic modulation with the filter envelope. It's a very, very short envelope to just create a very snappy modulation. And then in the MIDI, no, in the, where is it? Yeah, in the modulation section, there is another LFO. This LFO is set to random. And very important is that you switch the retrigger button on, because then you get a new value for the bandpass filter with every note that is being triggered. This sound runs into another echo. Then there is a chorus, ensemble, and reverb, and another compressor to compensate for the volume changes. And those are all the sounds that I prepared for the session that I played. And I'm wondering why there's so much reverb here right now. It's a little bit too much. So this is it for tonight. Thanks a lot for watching. I tried to demonstrate how I use just a few sounds and samples to create music. I rather work with some elements and transform them with filters and effects rather than throwing a lot of presets and samples into a track. Maybe you found that interesting and have some fun creating your own music with samples or whatever you have at your disposal right now. Again, thanks for watching and see you next time.